It's nearly infinite. It's not actually infinite as far as I know, but it's very close to it. So there's no one way that works for everybody, and there's no way that works for you specifically. There's like some you learn a little bit during every single encounter, and depending on how much information you can retain depends on how much you're able to sort of carry that momentum forward into the next games.
Okay. Yeah.
So yeah, you get little bits here, little bits there. You'll get a little bit of something from our game here. I'll give you some tools. If you would like, I'll help you learn how to start building your own opening repertoire on Lichess. I usually offer that as well.
Okay.
And yeah.
Okay, great. Thanks. Thanks,
Yep.
Gary.
Yep. So I usually I try to get people to, during every move, go through the little mental thing that is just looking for checks, captures, and hanging pieces.
Okay.
So before you do anything else, before you look at the pawn structure, material imbalance, anything more complicated lines, just run through, are there any checks for either side? Look at them, see if they're dangerous, see if you need to pay attention. Are there any hanging pieces? That means a piece that's not guarded whatsoever by any other piece. Look at it, make sure that you're not going to blunder. And captures, so anything that's like looking at another piece that could capture it in one move, you want to just, like in a very short fashion, like not more than 30 seconds or so, run through those three on every single move.
Okay.
The idea is to reduce blunders that way.
Yeah. I understand. It's the easiest way to lose a game, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just leave your pieces hanging.
Yep.
Or not take advantage of your opponent hanging theirs.
That's correct. So I'm sending you the match now. So just talk out, if you could, your thought process for before you make a move and what you think is going on in the position, what you think about material imbalances. If you think you're about to get checkmated, try to like verbalize what it looks like it's going to be. Or if you think you're about to checkmate me, then do the same thing.
Okay, great.
You're Dimer V83, right?
Yes.
Peter, what's his face? Peter from Family Guy? Peter Griffin?
Yes, that's
Okay.
Yeah, I had a barber once say, excuse me, sir, you look like, do you watch Comedy Central? I was like, where are you going with this? He said you look like Peter Griffin. Well,
That's pretty good.
yeah.
That's pretty good. You know I'm part Irish also. Did you know that?
How are you?
Yeah, I'm German, Dutch, Irish.
Dutch, okay.
Yep.
Oh.
My
So you live in
grandfather's
the
name
Netherlands
my
before?
grandfather's name actually was Dutch. It was Cornelius Dutch Warmerdam.
Ah, okay. Yeah, I used to live in the Netherlands before I came to Singapore.
Nice.
I didn't really get a grasp on the language, though.
What is their language?
The Dutch language.
It is the Dutch language. Okay.
Yeah, Dutch. So, Dutch is quite a harsh-sounding language with a lot of long words.
Yeah, I can
Which
imagine.
is far too complicated for a simpleton like me.
Are you able to see my challenge there, David?
Uh, oh yes, I do. Yeah, yeah. Sorry.
Oh, you're good.
Okay, oh, I'm black. Okay.
Okay, good luck to you. So generally, we'll talk about this also, but as far as openings, the recommendation for beginners is just get your pieces out in a somewhat harmonious fashion and castle your king. That's like the first recommendation. As you move on a little bit, then you kind of prepare against like one or two openings, and you prepare one or two openings, but in depth. That's what I've heard is, if you go all over the place, you learn d4, e4, you learn f4, you learn knight c3 as first move, you learn g3 as the first move.
Yeah.
It's hard to
I
study.
typically, as black, I typically play the French.
Okay. French works.
Okay.
Yep, go with whatever you're comfortable with. And I'm a Queen's Gambit player, so as long as I can, I will usually play d4, c4 if I'm allowed
That's
to.
what I've been that's what I've been learning as white.
Good, good.
Okay. Okay, so I'm going to bring my pawn to c5 to challenge
Okay.
the center.
So whenever the pawn comes to c5 as white,
Yeah.
if I already have my pawn on e3, then you take and I take, and that's kind of like an isolated pawn. If I don't have that situation going on, then
Okay.
you taking my d4 pawn will essentially make it so I don't have much of a pawn presence in the center, which can be important. But at the same
That's
time,
when a3 has been played.
sorry,
That's when a3 has already been played.
a3?
Yeah, is that what you said?
No, no, no. I'll try to explain a little bit further. Like if I had e3 is what I said. If e3
Oh,
had
sorry,
already been
E3,
played.
my bad. My
Right.
bad. Okay. Okay. Recapture.
Have you heard of isolated pawns at all?
Yes.
Yeah, so when you play c5, something to remember, maybe to write a note about. If you play c5 as black, and white already has this c4 d4 thing going on,
Yeah.
then what happens is usually white can force black into an isolated pawn position, which means you have one pawn that's not connected by anything else, like no other pawns around it.
And you could do that simply here by taking on c5.
I could do that here by taking on c5. I don't have to, but it's just it's one of these little pieces I was telling you about. You eventually you add up a whole bunch of pieces, and you have like all of these little bits of information flying around in your head before you make a move, and you're a little bit more informed, right?
Yes.
So I'll go ahead and take it. I'll give you the isolated pawn.
Okay, that's very kind of you. And I'll recapture and develop my bishop.
Yep, yep. Now, as white, if I develop my bishop early, then I'm kind of giving you the possibility of a double attack. So my dark squared bishop, right? If I came out, say, to g5, and you played queen b6, right?
Yes.
Then you see there would be a double attack, right, on my weak pawn on b2
Yes.
and on f2, right?
f2. Yeah.
So because the position is a little bit open, I don't want to get into that. I'm going to blunt your bishop with e3, and my plan is just to develop my light squared in castle.
Okay. For me now, I'm going to bring my knight to f3, which will defend the pawn on d5.
f6, right?
Develop the knight. Oh, f6, sorry, my bad.
No, you're good. You know, it's funny with notation.
Yeah.
You watched Chess 24 a little bit, or you have seen some of it, right?
Yeah.
I thought it was kind of funny how they clearly got a memo where they were like, "You guys don't say this a4, d4, e6 stuff. Just say pawn forward 2 squares. Say knight over and up to the left." So don't confuse these people.
Yeah.
I thought that was kind of
I bought
funny.
the chess book, Gary, and it was in the old notation. So I was only just learning this outbreak notation, and we had the old notation. I didn't know what was going on, so that book didn't really serve me much purpose.
Okay.
I'm going to castle.
Yep. I'll do the same thing. Yeah, if you don't know how to use the notation, it's mostly just confusing.
And now I'll bring my pawn to b6, and the intention then is to give my bishop the option to go either towards b7, a6, or out towards the center of the board.
Okay. Fair enough. I'm just going to keep developing my pieces. So when an isolated pawn appears on the board,
Yeah.
and if you enjoy playing with isolated pawns, because at first I thought, oh, if they have an isolated pawn, then I'm just doing better because I can attack it and they can't defend it very well, right?
Yeah.
But then eventually I realized that isolated pawns are not inherently bad. It's just that both sides need to play in a certain way with respect to the fact that there is an isolated pawn present. And if one side doesn't understand as well how to play with or against it as the other side, then the other side is going to benefit from that knowledge.
Okay, yeah, understand. So, develop my bishop.
Okay. So as the side against the isolated pawn, do you know the way to remove the possible weakness of having an isolated pawn? What's the number one way to remove that weakness?
Not sure.
So the main way to remove the weakness of an isolated pawn is to trade it off, right?
Oh, okay.
So if eventually you were ever able to push that pawn forward to d4 without just losing it, then you would have an open board, and you'd no longer have an isolated pawn that I can attack forever, and you'd be doing quite fine. And my job as the side that's playing against the isolated pawn is I want to make sure you can never push that pawn forward without me just capturing it.
Okay.
Okay. So I'm just gonna, I don't believe you can push that pawn forward yet, so I'm just going to play b3 myself, try and get my last minor piece developed, and then we'll be on to the middle game.
Okay. I'm going to just look to just bring my rook into the semi-open file.
Okay, that's good. You always want to put a rook there if you have the semi-open file. So I'll just continue with my regular plan.
Okay, and let's defend it twice. So the isolated pawn at the moment, I don't think it's ready to push.
Yeah, I don't think so.
So I'm not gonna go down that route yet, but it's still defended by the bishop and the knight, so I can look to develop my other knight, even if it means blocking the queen defending.
Yep, so the before you get into depth of calculation, just the most basic calculation you want to do is if you have a piece or a pawn that's being attacked, so long as you're defending it as many times as it's being attacked, then at first glance it can't be taken. So if you look at me, I'm attacking it with the knight and the queen, that's twice. If you look, you put your knight onto d7, you see you're blocking your queen from it, so you're removing that, but you still have a bishop and a knight on it, then it's protected enough for the moment.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, so we're both fully developed, and now it's going on toward middle game plans. What I've noticed is if an isolated pawn does come up on the board, then play mostly revolves around that. So basically it simplifies everything, and whoever has the isolated pawn is trying to defend it or push it, or play around it, such as playing a knight into e4 if you can, and the other side is just trying to block it from going forward and possibly to capture it.
Yeah.
Okay. So I see that there's a little bit of a hole on f5 where I could possibly try to put a knight or something at some point. And I don't want you to push your d pawn forward, so if I were to get my other knight to d4, that would solidify that pawn push from happening quite a bit. So I'm going to play a knight to b5 with the intention of possibly bringing it back to d4. And this also opens my bishop up on the long diagonal.
I never thought of the move being for that purpose, actually. Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's another thing. If you want to get better, is get in the minds of people who are better and understand like why they make the moves they make, and then eventually you'll be able to start doing the same thing, and then you'll get better.
So, trying to get your knight into f5, you're using the other knight as kind of the launch pad, if you like, for that.
Yeah, I'm simultaneously making it difficult for you to push d5 or d4,
Yeah.
and I'm able to rotate through that square to f5. If you didn't want that to happen, you'd have to either guard f5 or you'd have to take my knight with your bishop.
Yeah. Okay. And typically here, I would try and kick the knight away
Mm-hmm.
by pushing pawn to a6.
Yep, that's reasonable. So in this type of situation, if you see a piece that's in your camp, for the most part, one piece is not going to do a ton of damage. So
Okay.
kicking it is usually fine. You just want to make sure that, say I didn't have another piece looking at c7 to where I could fork your rooks, right?
Yes.
So that's not the case, so I cannot play knight to c7, so therefore you're kicking me away, I have to move, but you're also kicking me to where I wanted to go in the first place. So that's
Yeah.
not a bad thing for me.
Yeah.
If you can get your
Well,
opponent to kick you into the position you want to be, then that's not necessarily bad.
yeah. Um, okay. So just looking around and okay, your bishop in b7 is not defended, but that's not attacked, and I don't see any way of attacking that anytime soon.
Yep, that's good. You're looking at your checks, captures, and hanging pieces, right?
Yeah. So what I'd like to do next is to actually push my knight into e4,
Mm-hmm. Yep.
and that would then also create the opportunity for my other knight to develop
Right.
back into f6, and also create some kind of blockade in that part of the board,
Yeah, that's reasonable.
also supported by my isolated pawn.
Yep, and this is what I was saying earlier about isolated pawns. When you're the one with it, you want to play around it, and you want to sometimes use that pawn as a decoy. So sometimes you'll sacrifice your isolated pawn, but at the expense of, to me, that you either have a strong attack going on, or you're possibly winning a piece, or you're messing my structure up, or something like that, right?
Yeah.
So you're not necessarily trying to guard it to the death, but you want to maneuver your own pieces around it and use the squares that it's guarding, like you just did, to get your pieces in.
Okay.
Okay. So as far as you attacking me, you have kind of two pieces sort of aimed at my king side. Maybe there are knight takes f2 sacks possibly in the air. So those are things I want to consider at least. And as well, my f5 square is still vacant for my knight, and if I do play knight to f5, then I am also attacking g7, right?
Yeah.
Twice.
Yes.
And that would be something that you would have to deal with somehow, whether it be trying to sack your knight or whether it be pushing f6, which usually is not good. Have you ever listened to Ben Feingold at all?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
You know he says, right, never play f6.
Yes.
And it's kind of sarcastic, like he laughs and makes jokes a lot, but a lot of times if you play f6 out of necessity, it usually means you're kind of like messing your kingside structure up in a way that is conducive to attacks by your opponent. Okay. So I could play knight f5. Say you took f2, I take with my rook, you take with your bishop. On e3, you will have won 2 pawns for the piece, and you're about to get an exchange, and I don't necessarily want that. So I'm going to go with a little bit of a slower plan of a3. Have you heard of bad bishops?
Yes. Yeah. Where they kind of blunted, the diagonals all blocked off, and they can't really do an awful
Right, but it's a specific. It's not just that they're blunted; it's that they're blunted by your own pawns. That's a bad bishop.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So your bishop on b7 is technically to some extent bad, and it's not like a firm definition. You don't need all of your pawns to be on light squares for that bishop to be bad. But if you have pawns on the same color squares where it's slowing the mobility of that piece to a decent extent, then it can be considered a bad bishop.
It might be a bad bishop temporarily, right? So if I did push
Yes.
pawn to d4,
Yes.
then that bishop would come alive.
Correct. Or if you could see ways where I could say trade a piece of mine for your bad bishop, usually whoever has the bad bishop, temporarily or not, would like that, right? So you would want to possibly move towards situations where that could happen.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think if you were to move into your knight into f5,
Mm-hmm.
which could be quite an annoying position for me. That could be something where I could maybe look to exchange my bishop by moving maybe back to c8 and challenging your knight that way, maybe.
Yep, possibly. You'd have to get your other knight developed though before your bishop could see. Yeah, just like that. That's good. Yep. So I played a3 with the intention of playing b4 afterward, and the logic behind this from my side is that I want to play knight f5, but I also don't want to deal with knight takes f2. And we can look at it after the game to see. I have a feeling if I play knight f5 immediately, I think the knight sack on f2 is at least even, if not possibly slightly better for black. So that's the reasoning behind me kicking your bishop before trying any knight f5 stuff.
Okay, so looking around, so obviously the primary danger there is that my bishop is now under attack. There is the potential to either rock it back towards maybe d6,
Mm-hmm.
or to exchange it off for your knight in the middle of the board, and you can either then recapture. Well, you've got 4 potential ways to recapture that, so that's going to take quite a bit of calculation then.
Yep, if you start off when you're trying to look at how you think I'll recapture, start off by looking at what capture would be really bad for my piece mobility, and what capture would render your isolated pawn no longer a weakness.
Also got to keep an eye on time. 7 minutes.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Okay. I am going to take the knight.
Okay. So to answer my own question, if I took back with the pawn here, then
Yes.
that not only makes your backward pawn no longer able to be attacked by like heavy pieces because my pawn's down in the way, but also that turns my bishop on b2 into my own bad bishop, right? Because now my pawn's blocking it. So if you're the opponent and you're looking at possible captures, if you're playing someone who knows something about the game, they're probably not going to take with the pawn, so you can rule that out.
Yes.
And then the other 2 captures are a little bit more nuanced. Like if I took with the knight, then yes, I'd still have knight f5 as a possibility, which may be a good consideration. If I took with the bishop, then maybe I could bring my queen to c2, then to b2, and then put a battery toward your king.
Okay.
Those are a couple possibilities. The reason I would hesitate by taking with my knight is that if I ever move that knight away, say to f5, and there was no major threats, you could already consider pushing d4 yourself and sack that pawn just because you're opening up your bad bishop, and that probably would be worth sacking the pawn. And I don't
Right.
necessarily want that, so I probably would take with either the bishop or the queen. And for me at that point, if I don't see any huge reason to take with one or the other, then I just go with instinct or like visual preference. And for me in this case is queen, so I will take with the queen. And I'm also lining up against your king. If I ever can kick that knight on f6 away, then there are checkmate threats.
Yeah, absolutely. So certainly one thing I don't want to be doing here is moving away from f6.
Yeah, not necessarily.
Okay, so what would be next? Okay, so
Remember, checks captures hanging pieces. You always want to run through that at least 10-20 seconds.
okay, in terms of checks, there's no checks that I can force from this position that
Yep,
I see.
yep.
You don't necessarily you don't have any checks unless I move
Your
my
knight.
knight.
Yep.
In terms of captures, see any captures? I don't.
So you still have the possibility of taking on f2. That would be a sack, which is probably bad in this case because you don't have the bishop backing it up like you did before.
Right.
And from my side, if you want to get technical about it, I could sack my queen for your knight, and I could take the pawn on b6. And this is all like super superficial stuff, but sometimes like you can sacrifice a queen in a way that doesn't look obvious at all. And if you just run through it, oh, what if he takes my pawn on b6? Oh, it's no problem. Oh, wait, is there something deeper than that? And then that triggers you to look a little bit further, and then you might catch, a checkmate threat or something. But if you never considered it, then you won't be able to even possibly look for it, right?
Right. Okay. Okay. I don't see any obvious moves here. So what I'm thinking is to try and take the open file, the C file.
Yep, that's a good idea.
And I'm just having a look just to make sure, so the pawn on a6 is still defended by the bishop. But if I am to move that bishop, I've got to be aware that that pawn would then become undefended.
Yep, that's good.
And I'm going to just move across here in the interest of time and down to 440.
Okay, don't worry too much about the time. I can add more time if you want. I'm not going to just automatically do it, but if you get way low, then I can just give you more time, and it's not a big deal because we're not trying to do like time pressure learning right now. So don't worry about that too much. But I will ask you, like, would you like me to add time before I do it?
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so this is another problem that a lot of beginners have is they get to a certain point in the game and they're like, well, I'm not really attacking much. I can't do this, can't do that. I'm guarding this, guarding that. What do I do, right? So learning what to do in positions that are relatively equal is a very big skill to have, and it's something that all level of players can work on. And I'm not going to tell you there's exactly a solution for that problem, but just to know how do I manage myself when the position looks sort of equal. There's no like immediate mate threats. There's no immediate hanging pieces. That's kind of an important thing to work on. Okay, so I could move my knight if I wanted to. I could move it to e5. Is there a future for that knight? I could go e5 and then maybe pull the knight back to g4. You can't take because that's mate, so that's one possibility. I don't know if I like the look of that. Another possibility is activate my light squared bishop. They also say, or the old masters say, if you can't think of anything else to do in the position, improve your most poorly placed piece.
Okay. Makes sense.
Yep. And my most poorly placed piece is probably the rook on A1 because it's staring at its own pawn. Nothing's going on that side of the board. And I don't really want your rook coming into C2. So a reasonable move for me, yep, is just to challenge the fully open C file with my A1 rook. And you might say, why didn't I put the other rook there? And the reason is because if you wanted to, you could play your, well, if you guarded G7 first, you can't do this immediately, but if there was no mate threat, you could play your knight to G4 if I move my other rook, and then you'd be double attacking my pawn on F2, right?
Yeah.
But of course you can't move that knight because there's a mate threat.
No, not with that mate threat.
Yep.
Looming. So that's something I'm looking at is there a way that I can kind of interrupt that battery?
Now if you, at some point, you'll look through your games and you'll say, well, you know, everything was fine, and eventually just, I didn't hang any pieces or anything, but eventually the position fell apart. And the reason that happens, when it does happen, is because there are sort of slow positional advantages where if you allow them to accrue, then they become kind of like a tidal wave at some point. And one of those is bishop batteries, open lines for bishops, and I have an open line, completely, fully uncontested open line from A1 to H8. Whenever that opens, that's making threats, and so it glues your pieces to some extent to making sure that you don't get mated, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's certainly stunting my. Sorry.
And then so to tie things sort of in back to, you could say, why is this? Like, why does he have this open diagonal? And you could see, well, it's because David made the decision to take the knight on D4, right?
Yes.
And that's the reason. So then to sort of counteract that idea, you say, what could I have done instead? Oh, maybe I could have brought my bishop back to F8, which guards G7 and retains my bishop pair.
Yes.
Right. So you just that's how you sort of improve your game, is you look at what you're doing that changes the actual position, the structure of the position, the imbalances of the position, and whether or not you had to make a move which fundamentally changed it.
Yeah, I agree. And it's one of those that I'm looking back at now and thinking that was a bad move.
Yep.
Or a move that I didn't really necessarily need to make.
Right. And it's not really a huge thing either way. It's part of chess, is you're not always going to make the best move, but learning when you have options before you make the move will be helpful.
Yeah.
Okay, so you push B4.
Yep.
So
To B5.
that tells me that you would like to use C4 as a outpost if you could. So you would like to maybe reroute a knight to that square. It would be a little bit more firm there. I don't know if it would be useful in this position, but I see that as a possibility.
Yeah.
Right now, I don't have any mate threats that I can see. I just have long-term pressure, so I'm just going to improve my other piece, which is my bishop on E2. And I'm just going to reroute it to D3, put a little bit more pressure. And before I, make a move like this, I look at possible moves you could attack my queen with. Mostly the only move that you can do that with is like rook C4, but I could just take that with the bishop, and I'm not too worried about that.
Yeah, it's okay. So what I was looking at here was potentially trying to get that knight into B4 and try and challenge your bishop so I can interrupt that battery.
Okay. Did you mean c4? Or
Sorry, yes. Into c4. So sort of reroute the knight through d6
mm-hmm. That's a possibility.
and back into c4, and at least try and challenge your knight that
Yep,
way.
that's a possibility for sure.
I'm good to do that.
Okay.
But I do know that it's now opened up the line for your bishop, your other bishop, your light square bishop.
Yes, yes. And what I also see is you opened up my queen as well to move laterally. So now I can consider moves like queen to h4, which would put more pressure on that knight on f6. And it's also difficult for you to move it, because if you move it, then I have h7, right?
Yeah.
So I'm going to go ahead and make that move.
Okay. So now we've got threat of...
Are you okay if I add time to your clock?
Yeah, go for it. Yes, please.
Okay. I'm just going to give you a bunch more so you don't have to worry about it at all.
How are you able to do that then? Is that just in unrated games you
No, it's a rated game. You can try it with me if you want. It's just see where it says draw and resign on your board.
Settings.
To the right, the first button to the right of both of those looks like a little plus, and then you can give 15 seconds to your opponent.
Oh, okay. I didn't know. Okay, I'm playing on my tablet, so I don't see the same options.
Okay. Well, now you have plenty of time, so don't worry about the time.
Thanks.
Yeah.
So you've obviously now got your bishop and your queen looking at h7. So that's one headache. And
yes.
you've also still got your other open bishop looking at my knight on f6.
Yep. So the most basic threat I see here, if you do nothing about it, is I just take your knight with my bishop, and the most basic interruption I can do to your position is you have to take with, if you took with the queen and there was no mate threat on h7, even if I just took and you took with the queen, then you'd get doubled pawns, right, on the f-file. That's the most basic positional disruption I could do, but at the same time, if I take that knight, you have to worry about h7 at the same time. So if you could, you would like to defend against that, both threats. If you could. I don't know if you can. It could be possible, I'm not sure.
Okay. So trying to even challenge your queen would just flat out hang a knight, so you don't want to be doing that.
So to rule out, some possibilities, if you play g6, you just lose your knight, right? So you don't want to play g6.
Yeah,
the other possibility would be to play h6, right? To where if I took your knight, I'm not threatening mate, or at least, havoc on that side of the board. So you just want to do a little bit of calculation. If you push h6, do I have anything like drastic?
Yeah, I was actually looking at h6. I was looking at the two moves that I was looking at were still potentially getting my knight into c4, defended by the two pawns.
Yep.
Or to push the pawn on h6. So those are the two moves that I'm looking at.
Yeah, I think those are reasonable. Another thing to consider if you're getting attacked, a lot of times if you push h6, that pawn will either get sacked, the bishop will take it if it can, or say in this
Yeah.
case, take the knight and then ruin the pawn structure completely. So something else to consider if you're in this kind of position is just look at ignoring it, letting me take the knight, and say you take with your queen, and I take your. This is a calculation, right? I take your pawn on h7 with check, with my queen. You want to make sure that you're not getting checkmated. So the square, the key square in these types of attacks is e7. So
Right.
if e7 is blocked by one of your pieces, and I'm able to get queen takes h7 check, and you move over one, then queen h8 will be mate because you now no longer have any escape square, so long as you can't like put a piece on g8.
Okay. Yeah.
So since e7 is open, you could consider just not trying to guard h7 at all, and trying to escape with your king out that way. But
Okay. So it's got its flight square.
yeah, yep.
Okay. Good to move into here.
Okay. Okay, so you're attacking my bishop. The very first thing to calculate for me is, like we already talked about, take your knight. You're probably going to take with the queen, and I don't see any like benefit for taking h7 with my bishop. I would probably take it with the queen. You play king to f8. And then I could play queen to h8 check, in which case you would play your king out to e7. So then this is the position I look at mentally. If my queen's on h8, your king's on e7, I have won a pawn, but do I have anything more than that, and is whatever I did to your position worth me taking your knight on f6? That's the question I ask myself. And I'm not 100% sure that it is worth it. I might want to build up the attack a little bit before I do that. But if I declined to do that immediately, then also I can consider just taking your knight. You take with the queen, I take with my queen, and I disrupt your pawns. That's also a serious consideration.
That would be the move that I would see most frequently at my level.
Right.
In this position, I think would be the opportunity to disrupt that structure.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe, yeah.
Yep. Okay, let's see. I don't really want to necessarily take, although it might be good. But I'm also getting low on time, so I don't want to think too much here.
Yeah, sorry, I don't know how to add time.
Oh, you're fine. I have 10 seconds. It's not a problem. So I'm gonna back my bishop up for now, and let the attack grow a little bit before. So I am giving up the pawn on a3 if you wanted to take that, but I'm going to try to develop a few more pieces over here first.
Okay, one thing that I was contemplating was taking that pawn
Right.
on a3.
Yep.
I was also wondering if this was an opportunity to push my pawn on to d4, but that would it would be a sacrifice of the pawn. But one thing that I'm be concerned about then is you could just, if you take that and create an open file, open E file,
Mm-hmm.
and move a rook across to that, that would then suffocate my king's escape square.
Yes, that's true. That's true. So maybe taking the pawn is your best bet.
Yeah.
I'm not 100% sure on that one. Okay, so my idea here was to get my knight involved with knight to d4. Your knight is still pinned to f6 because h7 is still being attacked, so now I'm thinking about trying to get my knight to f5, which would make 4 pieces involved in the attack. Another rule of thumb is if you have 2 pieces or less, including the queen, there's usually not enough for a mating net. If you have 3 to 4, then there are enough pieces there if you're able to see it and if it exists. 2 or less, there's usually not enough.
So I was looking at a couple of options here. One of them was to try and bring my queen off the back rack.
Mm-hmm.
I know that you've only very temporarily blocked the line of your bishop, but that's just going to open up on the next knight move anyway.
Possibly, yeah.
So I still need to protect that knight. And if I were to move my queen forward to say d6, then you'd be challenging it on the next move anyway if you put your knight into f5.
Yep.
So I don't know if that's worth it. Another move that I was thinking about was to try and bring my bishop hasn't done anything all game.
Right.
So I was looking at trying to find a way to get my bishop into the game.
That's going to be a difficult task, although it might be possible. You'd have to do something like get rid of your rook from c8 and then try and reroute it through that square.
Yes, that's what I was looking at, if there was an opportunity to do that.
Yep. I would say in this position, being that the attack looks pretty strong, I would use, and you don't have to do this move of course, but I would use the sort of rule of thumb about isolated pawns anyway, which is put pieces on and around the squares that it guards, and therefore you can sort of use it. And also, say if you play your knight to e4, you're blocking my bishop, there's no mate immediately on h7, you're opening up queen trades, which is good if you're up material, and you are actually up a pawn right now, and that could be a good move. I don't know if it's a good move, I don't know if you should play it, but that's something as black I would consider, because this attack feels kind of dangerous.
Yes, I also want to try and find a way of getting your queen off the board. Mm-hmm. So offering a queen trade is something which I would be interested in, and I'm fairly sure you'd decline that.
If I could, then yes, I would decline it.
But I am going to go in here for now.
Okay. So I don't want a queen trade, which means I need to put my queen somewhere else. Probably that would be either g4 or h5. And I think h5 looks a little nicer because I'm still aiming at h7. You can't attack my queen with your rook, so yeah. We'll go queen h5. Still trying to get knight f5 in if possible. And I also now have possible threats of playing like f3 and kicking your knight and opening up the bishop again. But I think when we look at the game, I have a feeling the computer will say knight to e4 was probably the only way to not get like mated in 10 or something. That's just my gut feeling. I don't know for sure.
It did feel. I do feel a little bit. What's the word here? But like the attack is very strong.
You feel a little safer, right? You're blunting one of the major pieces.
Yeah.
Yep.
So what I was looking at here was try and get my, like I mentioned just now, is try and get my queen out.
Mm-hmm.
So it's actually doing something other than just sitting on the back rank.
Yep.
And if I could then maybe pass that through, I was maybe looking at g5, offering another queen trade, where it's also defended by the knight.
Yep, that could be a move.
And I'm thinking about that as using the queen there as a defensive resource, but also then having looking at your king as well.
Yeah, multi-purpose moves are good for sure.
So if my bishop does come alive, both the bishop and the queen are looking at your king. So I'm going to play this one.
Okay. All right.
Let's see.
So I think if I traded queens, I still have enough activity to make the pawn down all right, but I don't know for sure. So I might just retreat the queen still. Yeah, I think I'm just gonna retreat the queen. I'm not gonna trade. I have a feeling I would be okay if I did trade, but I would rather not.
Okay, my knight is doing a nice job just blocking that diagonal now.
Mm-hmm.
Supported by the isolated pawn, which itself is supported by the bishop.
Yep.
Potentially looking at is... No, I don't like that. I was looking at, is there a way that I could potentially double up my rooks down the c file?
If two rooks are already contesting a file, it's very difficult to double them unless you have, see how you have d5 and b5 also guarding the same square?
Yeah.
If I didn't have a bishop there, which, you know, if you did put your rook on c4 or c4 and I took it, it's not necessary. It might be worth the exchange sacrifice simply because you're repairing your pawn structure and you're opening up your light squared bishop, right? That's been dead the entire game.
Yeah.
So that type of move can be considered, but my point was that if both rooks are already contesting the file, it's hard to double them because once you move it up a little bit, my rook can just take it, right?
Yeah, it's just going to take it anyway, yeah.
Right.
Okay.
And also remember to do the checks, captures, hanging pieces thing if you can.
Okay. So in terms of hanging pieces... I see that your bishop is undefended.
Yep.
Your light square bishop is undefended.
Mm-hmm.
So if there's a way that I can maybe challenge that, but I don't want to be opening up the diagonal again.
Yep. If my queen wasn't looking at h7, I would say a move to possibly consider would be to play your knight to d2, which is attacking my rook on f2, and at the same time maybe hopping back to c4, but that knight kind of needs to stay there for the moment.
Yeah, it's doing it, well, it's doing its defensive duty there.
Yeah.
But I'm just going to try and get this knight back into the game.
Okay. All right,
At the moment, it's not doing anything.
So you're finally allowing me to play my knight f5 move, which I think is probably a good idea here. And that gives me a little bit of an attack right on g7.
Yes,
I could possibly consider playing f4 in a moment. There are a few possibilities here.
Okay, so I don't like the way that your bishop and your knight are both staring down.
Yeah, they're coordinating, right?
Yeah, at the same time, if I move the knight, which is currently on e4 back, then that opens up the diagonal for your queen and your bishop.
Yep.
Zoning in on h7. So there's quite a significant attack here.
Yep, there are some calculations to do, and always when you're looking at calculations, don't just calculate because you see, oh, this thing might work. If you think that if you think something's there, you really think something's there, then calculate. Don't calculate because, oh, I think this might work. Like you wanna sort of retain your calculating energy for what you consider to be necessity.
Okay.
Because like in a tournament situation, I've spent lots of time calculating moves that when I looked at them later, they weren't good to begin with, and then I didn't calculate them properly anyway, so it was like a waste of time on both fronts.
So, but one thing that I'm looking at is to annoy Ben Feingold and to kind of cut that diagonal.
Okay.
But I'm also then thinking maybe you'll just sacrifice that bishop anyway.
Maybe.
Maybe I don't know. But I'm gonna do that. I don't think you will.
Okay.
I'm going to play that just to kind of try and cover that angle.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so don't see any obvious attacks yet. So I'm just going to develop a bishop for now, regroup a little bit, make sure I don't run out of time.
22 seconds, okay.
But it is 10-second increment, so
Yeah.
I shouldn't actually run out of time.
So what I'm thinking now, two options, or a couple of options that I'm just thinking about. I think moving my knight from c4 into either d2 and maybe threaten your rook, but that's easily dealt with.
Mm-hmm.
And not really looking at that sort of one move attack. Similarly doing the same if I was to try and challenge the bishop by moving into b2 and challenge your light square bishop. Be a one mover and you could just rock that back.
Well, if you played to b2, I can just take it, right? Because my dark squared bishop is looking at
the
b2.
dark square bishop, yeah, it'd be hanging a piece.
Yeah. But that's also it, is just getting your mind to where you notice if like a piece is hanging or not, because it will happen, and if you remember to constantly go checks, captures, hanging pieces every single move, it gets tiresome, but it will pay off in the long run.
And again, I don't see anything particularly obvious here for me. So
Yeah, the plans aren't super obvious for black, and for white, all the plans involve lots of calculations, which I don't have time to do. So it's gonna be interesting. It's gonna be interesting to see how this turns out. But I'm considering pushing f3 myself soon, because now my pawn on e3 is guarded twice, and then that will reopen up my light squared bishop, and I have possible sacks with the knight if I want.
okay. So another thing that I was looking at now that the knight has interrupted the see if this was an opportunity to double up down that file.
Oh yeah, that'd be it. That is a possibility now that that your knight is on c4. Okay. I'm gonna be playing a little bit faster and talking less while it's my move, so I don't run out of time.
Okay. I'm thinking now's the time to. We'll do that. I know I've dropped that.
Okay.
Ooh, okay. Wasn't expecting that. Okay. I'm good to know. Take this pawn.
Take the pawn, alright. There's no mate threat, so I'll take this one.
Okay. I mean, I've got to take that. But two options. Well, I haven't really. I've got to take this one back.
Okay. Gonna give a check.
If I slide into h8, then I'm done for.
Yep, that would be mate in one.
So I've got my options are to try and block. So I could do that either with the rook, but then you're just going to then make my rook a target.
Well, the other one you want to consider is if you play to king f8, do I have any mates or forks or anything? You only want to play like rook to f7 if you absolutely have to, and then for that one you'd want to calculate if I play rook f7 and he plays queen to e8 check, is that a huge deal? I could play check, you just drop your rook back to f8, right, and then I could sort of repeat the position, but it wouldn't be a mate. In these types of positions, if I have a light squared bishop that can get to like e6, right?
Yes.
Then I play queen e8 check, your rook's on f7, it goes back to f8, then I play bishop to e6 check, then that makes your king have to move to h8, right?
Yeah.
So in that situation, you would not want to be able to play rook f7 because that would lead to mate.
Okay, so I'm going to try and get out of the immediate check this way.
Yep. So I took that for two reasons. One, because you just gave up the piece because your piece was just hanging there, right? But also, this removes the defender from c5, which is important for my bishop. Like if I played bishop c5 check and you didn't do anything else, you'd have to sacrifice your rook for it because otherwise it's mate. So that's something to consider if you are considering like taking on f1, taking my rook on f1.
Yeah, I mean that to me was the move that I was looking at. Was do I just go for that?
Yep.
Capture of your rook on f1. I'm just trying to have a look at what of your attack. Your attack is already there. Mine is a little bit behind.
Mm-hmm.
But I think this is the point where certainly players, lower level players, they get greedy, right? And they just see, ooh, free rook.
Exactly.
Or a rook exchange.
Exactly. You want to always do your best to calculate. Like getting mated is never better than, or it's never like a better situation for you than you winning a rook temporarily.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, it's just looking at this anyway. You'd win you'd get a rook back immediately anyway by forking. Even if you wanted to do that by playing check.
Yep.
Checking me and then clearing the rook out from c7, depending on.
Well, if you want to take it one step further, if I did get that check in and you took, and I took back with the pawn, and your knight had already taken on f1, since my dark squared bishop would be gone at that point, then you do have the check on e3 with your queen, and I would need to calculate that I wasn't getting mated somehow. And also, if you did get that check in, you might be able to win my bishop on d3 the next move as well. So this is getting deeper into calculation, but learning how to do this is, again, is how you're going to improve overall.
So I'm not going to be greedy. I'm not going to go after your rook on f1. I think that's not the wise choice.
Okay.
So trying to think about how I could defend my own rook on c7. If I brought it over to say e7, then your bishop could just go into c5, pin it, and then mate will promptly.
Yep, that looks a little dangerous for sure.
I do need to somehow get my rook. Thinking about my rook, I'm also thinking that it still at least defends that file. If I just move it back, it's still defended by the bishop.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm going to try and play this move.
Okay.
Try and defend the back rank so I can.
Yep, that makes sense. Okay, I just have to move. I don't know if this works. I think it works. It might not, but it looks like very dangerous at the very minimum, and I have 20 seconds, so I have to go for it.
Yeah, it certainly does. Okay, so I'm going to take it back with the pawn.
Yep.
And now I'm in trouble.
Yeah, you only have one square here. Okay.
Nasty.
Yeah, it's a little gross for sure.
Okay, I think I'm kind of forced into the corner. You rats. Okay.
So I basically, if I can give check on e4, e5 or f6, then that's going to be pretty much mate. So I need to try to kick your queen away from guarding either one of those squares. Either if I get your queen off of f6 or e5, then I'm pretty sure it's going to be mate.
Okay, so even. Yeah, I understand.
You could give a spite check with your rook. I don't know if it does a whole ton. It might.
Okay, I'm not going to fall for the hanging knight, because
Okay.
the threat at the other end is greater.
Yep, there's still a big threat here though.
Yeah.
Either queen to e5 or queen to f6, and you can only block with your queen, right?
So yeah.
Yep.
And there we are, mate.
There it is.
There it is. No, thank you very much, Gary. That was quite the lesson.
Yeah, you played really well, David. Like, as far as 1200s are concerned, I think your logic is very good. And as we look at this game, I'm gonna do it quickly because we did run a little bit over an hour, but I'm gonna run it through the review really quick and let you know like what the machine said about our play.
Okay.
And of course, I'm gonna send you the. I'll send you the video afterward.
I really look forward to that.
Yeah. So machine says the machine says we both didn't play super great. It says I had a 71% and it says you had a 65%. It looks like I had a few blunders where I gave away the advantage completely. One of them being knight back to g3. And if you watch the video, then you'll be able to see this game review at the end of it. Knight back to g3 was terrible apparently, and I should have probably just taken your... Are you able to get analysis, or do you have to have the paid version to get that?
I have the premium account, so I've got the analysis up now. So,
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep, I was just supposed to take your knight, and actually I didn't consider taking your knight that you just hung, because I didn't consider that because I had like 20 seconds and I just had to make a move. So
Yeah.
So that's probably why my accuracy is a little bit lower. I may consider playing games that are a little bit longer, but then if I'm doing like hour-long lessons, then that's kind of difficult because you can see this already went an hour and a half. Let's see.
Didn't like me trying to get the queen trade.
Yeah, it looks like I gave away the advantage quite a few times. The first time with bishop to d3, it did not like that at all.
Really didn't like me trying to double up on my rook.
It didn't like my bishop a1 at all. Didn't like my knight to d4 at all. Didn't like queen h5.
Oh, it's actually saying to completely so I was happy with the where we had the position where you moved your knight back to g3.
Mm-hmm.
And I was happy that I had my knight in as a block. It's just saying go ahead and take it.
Yeah.
Just go ahead and take it. Don't worry about, queen and bishop staring down at h7. I was so preoccupied with them looking at h7, I didn't look at attacking
Right.
your piece. They still got you as having the advantage. What was it then? No, then it's give a check.
Oh, interesting. Even at the end, when I pushed h4, you can just take my knight.
Oh.
I didn't even notice that.
Yeah, I saw it, but I thought that if I did take your knight, that, okay, it was mate in a couple of moves anyway, but I thought the knight, it's actually gone to minus 4.2. So if I just took it.
No, if you take it, it looks like it's even again. But
Okay.
I have to sacrifice my rook on h7, which sacrifice the rook on h7, then play e5, and then there's some perpetual after that because e5 opens up my bishop on d3. That's weird. So yeah, when I got in time trouble, I definitely was not calculating the way that I needed to. But yeah, these are kind of bad. So I thought that if you took the knight, then queen f6 check was just mate, but you can just move your king to g8.
G8. That literally I just played that in the analysis.
Yeah.
And then I've got my own mate. I've got my own threat then with giving you the check.
Yeah. Yep, I gotta bring my bishop back, and then you just drop your rook. Well, actually, it's not that simple because you can't just drop your rook because I have like my own counter mate threats with rook to f8. But yeah, you take the knight. You take the bishop with your knight, and then once I take that with my king, I guess, or no, queen, I gotta take it with my queen. And then it's saying bishop c6. You're just up a piece at this point. It's still really scary looking. Like this would be hard. This would still be hard for someone to play that, like, if you're not a master, even as black, it would be difficult, but it would be a something. But yeah, interesting. I had a lot of sort of missed things. So what I want to see is what the position was rated after. Yeah, see, after This is what I'm talking about. Like after I played rook to c1,
Rook to C, yeah.
um, that's what I'm talking about. The positional pressure that comes just from having this bishop and queen on open lines.
Yeah.
The engine says this is just about a winning position with best play from white. It's like a plus 2.25 with equal material.
Okay, I think we got slightly different depths of our engines then, haven't we? Like you're using the desktop version, I'm using the mobile version.
What does yours say?
At this point, it's still got you as about +2.
Okay, that's pretty close. Mine says plus
Yeah.
2.25, so it's not too
Okay.
terribly far off. But just to show you that like material, if you just count the numbers up, it doesn't necessarily mean a whole lot. It can be helpful, but does not necessarily mean like, oh, we have the same amount of pawns, 3 minor pieces, you know, position looks equal, but since you've got the isolated pawn, you've got your bad bishop, I've got the
Yeah.
good bishop, that's what makes it good for white. But of course, as the engine says, I didn't handle it quite correctly. Even
That
queen
was-
to h4 was okay. And I think I probably, yep, computer says just take on f6. And this is something that I kind of know, like, I know I shouldn't be dilly-dallying around and trying to make up stuff when I have like a concrete threat, which is just take the knight, you take with the queen.
Yeah, you still can give the check.
I still can give the check and you go to f8, and I don't even have to like give a check on h8.
I've just got to then, yeah, exactly. You've already forced me away from g8. You could make me run out into open ground.
Yep, and it's saying just knight to d4 after queen takes h7, and yeah, you're just it's just
wide
painful.
open then, aren't I? Yeah.
But again, you
That-
know,
that
it's
bishop-
+2. It's not anything terribly crazy. It's just when you're in a position where it's hard for you to find moves, you tend to make mistakes more easily that way.
My bishop moved on to b7. It moved 9 and didn't move again all game.
That's because of your isolated pawn on d5, right? That I blockaded.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, you blockaded the isolated pawn. The isolated pawn didn't move all game.
Nope.
And like you say, but both of us tried to. Well, I tried to defend around it, and you were using it as well in your attack. But yeah, it didn't move all game.
Yeah, I was using it to block your bishop in is what I was doing.
Yeah, it's super instructive, Gary, because like at my level, people just see it as free material, take it.
Yeah.
It's everything is material, and they say, oh, gobble that up. But you're using it to basically stun. I was playing a piece down, another piece down all game.
Yeah, and as you can see, like, if I wasn't in time trouble, I probably wouldn't have done these silly moves like not take your knight on at e4 or sort of some of the other moves that lost the advantage, like play h4. I wouldn't have done that, but you can see from just from looking at the game how the positional stuff I was talking about is very relevant. And if you understand that while you're playing, then the next time you see an isolated pawn appear on the position, you'll have a little better idea of how to play with it, and now you'll have a little better idea of how to play against it, right?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'll definitely take that into my consideration. Playing the French, you always, or not always, but you do very regularly end up with an isolated pawn.
Yep. It gave me a
definitely learn from that.
It gave me a double exclam for bishop takes f6. That's kind of funny.
Oh, did it?
Yeah. And it says you need to sacrifice your queen for the rook. And my move, my move was not supposed to be rook up. It was supposed to be queen up to e7. And the reason being because I get to win your queen next move, I think. So like, if I had time to calculate, I probably would have seen this, and that's rook takes, you played king to g7, if I played queen e7 check, and you move your king back to g8 or h8, right?
Yeah.
then I can do a discovered attack on your queen by playing rook to f8 check. And you can take that with your
yeah.
rook, but then I'll win your queen on g5, right?
Yeah.
So that's what I should have done. That would have ended the game, but I had no time, so kind of played a little badly. But
That's brilliant. Thank you so much for your time there, Gary. I really enjoyed it.
yeah, for sure. I appreciate it, David. We'll keep in touch, yeah?
Yeah, absolutely. Have a good night, Gary, and well, I'll speak to you again soon.
Yeah, for sure. Good night. Or good morning,
Thank you.
whatever it is.
Good night.
Okay, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.